really the question we're trying to phrase today is, how can the Nationals get back to the World Series? Something that they did not that long ago. It feels, I'm sure, like forever ago to the Nationals fans, but 2019, the Nationals are on top of the world. They win the World Series. But since then, the Nationals have, like, the rebuild of the Nationals has been long and so far utterly ineffective. They went to the basement the next year in 2020, but that's 2020, 26-34. We'll give them a pass on that one. But ever since then, 65 wins in 21, 55 in 22, 71 in 23, 71 in 24, 66. And I think that's the one, obviously, that is the one that was the last straw, because obviously Mike Rizzo and that front office is out. And now we have a new front office, the hiring of Paul Toboni. They have made multiple hires already. And I would say that you could say that there is a definite Red Sox feel, like that there's bringing other Red Sox officials other than Paul Toboni are coming over, which again, what normally happens in situations like this is when you leave, you're given like a number, right? Like, okay, you can take X or you can take so-and-so and so-and-so, but you're not allowed, no organization is going to let you just say, okay, they're all coming with me, but obviously there often is this, you can bring someone to be a top lieutenant or someone who's clearly getting a big promotion to the new, in the new front office, things like that. But that kind of leads us into, so we're going to look at first the National strengths as they stand right now. And then we'll get into the room for improvement and the things we would suggest that they need to improve. But so, Geoff, to kind of start that off, I would say that this new front office, the Paul Toboni front office, is kind of right now, it is to be determined, but I would say that you could anticipate that has a chance at least to be a strength. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I think, you look at the group that's coming over, whether it be Toboni, whether it be Devin Pearson, who was also involved in, was leading these Red Sox drafts over the last couple of years, where they've been able to build a pretty strong pipeline first to position prospects, and then seemingly overnight kind of turned into a pitching heavy system, something that we really had never seen previously. And, then, you look at Horowitz, Justin Horowitz coming over from the Pirates, who was there for a couple of years, had previously been in a position, in amateur scouting with the Red Sox. I think was maybe like a special assistant to the director or one of those sort of titles. His first draft with the Pirates, of course, they land a number one prospect in the entire game in Connor Griffin. And they didn't land him at like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. They did land him, in the top 10, but at the back end of it, pretty good pick. He's got some track record as well. They're a team that does well, a group of evaluators, I'll say, that does pretty well at identifying players in the amateur market that can then make a jump professionally. And we'll see how they set things up internationally and how that structure will change. And then I think also they're an organization that understands how, some synergy and complete and clear lines of communication between departments, particularly the acquisition side of things, whether that's scouting, whether that's analytics, R&D, or combination of all of those with player development is really, really important. And I think particularly on the Red Sox side over the last couple of years, they've seen how that's worked on hitting and on the pitching side. And, how just having consistent messaging all throughout the system and spring training, and then utilizing technology and information to make more informed decisions in player development, I think could really, uncover a lot of low-hanging fruit for the Nationals, just because, as we talked about before the show, generations-wise, it may not even be the upgrades that we've seen recently have success in terms of the Red Sox pitching development or the Blue Jays, each of, I think I've written about this year. They were probably a little bit further along in terms of when they had to improve than the Nationals are at this point. So there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit and things that they can upgrade process-wise, technology-wise, coaching-wise, etc.
Other thing I would say that's the other current strength, and we'll see where this goes with this is that a lot of the teams we're going to talk about, these 4 teams we're going to talk about, there's a number of teams I would say we're going to talk about where you will start with saying, like, we're going to talk about the Rockies, and the Rockies have very few players on their current big league roster who you could plausibly make the argument are going to be important members of a successful big league Rockies team. I don't think you can say that with the Nationals. You can say with the Nationals that they have a number of relatively young players who have at least shown something. Now, they may not have all synced it up at the same time, but Jacob Young, we'll work our way up, not the stars first, but Jacob Young has shown he's a very good defensive center fielder. Now, is he good enough to be a regular? Maybe, maybe not. But even if not, he's a very good fourth outfielder. I would say that you could say that Luis Garcia, been around a while now, but he is someone who has in his best years been a plausible starting second baseman. I think that you can say that Brady House, with improvement, he's got real power. Maybe he can be a third baseman for you or a first baseman for you. Dylan Cruz has been very disappointing in the big leagues, but this is one of the best college baseball players of the 21st century. CJ Abrams has been a above average shortstop at his best, and James Wood has been a all-star level player at his best. You have like Keibert Ruiz, maybe you can get him back to being a regular at catcher who's at least adequate. All these things are like potential building blocks. Or the other way you could go with this is it's a new regime. If they want to say this rebuild failed and we're not close, there also then are a number of players here who would still have value to, if you said, hey, we're going to take 2 steps back to take 3 steps forward, there are players here that you could get value for and trade if you wanted to. Obviously, Mackenzie Gore on the pitching staff would be probably the most prominent of those. But so there's ways you could go with this. There are pieces here, but there's still a lot of work to do, as you would expect for a team that has been basically the basement of, the Marlins are in this division and the Nationals have consistently been worse than them in the 2020s. And the Marlins, I would say at this point, are significantly probably further along, crazy enough, in their rebuild than the Nationals.
This episode is brought to you by Square. Your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. These businesses are what make the neighborhood the neighborhood. You and I are both in Orlando, and I see Square all the time at those awesome farmers markets around town.
And a lot of restaurants in general just have this to where they have the little thing plugged into their phone and you stick your card in it and wham, bam, we're out. It's cool. It's a way for local businesses to make money and make it easy on not only them, but also on me, the consumer, because Lord knows I'm not making or selling anything.
No, and it's a tap or on your phone. You double click.
You can even insert your chip if you want to swipe it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's changed the game. You can go to square.com/go/foul to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy that you did. Again, square.com/go/FOUL to learn more. Square. See you in the neighborhood.
Get after it, FT fam.
That gets us into it.
I will say that I do think that, a lot of the players you just named off, they probably have more high-end guys than the Marlins do at this point. The Marlins have gotten a lot more consistency from their players that are maybe a tier below than the Nationals have gotten from Gore, from Wood, certainly from Cruz, but Abrams. But like Abrams, Gore, and Wood, that trio has all shown well above average to plus potential in the major leagues for month to multiple month stretches. But they've also had really low lows in the same season on the back end. And I think that lack of consistency is a problem.
And that is the perfect, you set it on a T there, Geoff, because our number one suggested fix is this team. This is an organization that needs better Major League Baseball player development, not MILB here. We'll get to that, but MLB. I don't know how many Nationals you can point to and say they've gotten that player to his close to what he can do. There's a lot of players who you could say, if this is close to what Dylan Cruz can do, then that something went horribly wrong, because Dylan Cruz, And I think we're both now a little bit on the skeptical side. I think we both would describe Dylan Cruz more as a very good complementary player, likely, than a star. But he's got a lot of work to do to be a good complementary player right now. James Wood, with better contact, is a star, but 220 strikeouts in a season means that you're having months where you're just not producing at the level you need to, even if you are showing power at times and all that. CJ Abrams getting consistency. Like we said, all these players we're talking about, there is a lot of, can we optimize these players more? Can we get more out of them? And it does not mean no organization bats 750 doing that. But I would say that the National has been lower than the batting average for most organizations. That's kind of how I see that one. I want to kick the next one to you, Geoff, because this is one that you're really onto, which is drafting and developing college arms, which is something also that goes back to something, as you just mentioned, that the Red Sox have done. Why do you lay out that that's something that they need to do better and need to really work on?
Well, I think what we're seeing consistently, and I don't even think this is necessarily a new thing, but I do think in some ways it's been kicked into hyperdrive as the minors have shrunk, pitching injuries have grown, and the length of a lot of those injuries and the return time has grown. So there's been a greater need for a lot of college arms to move with just greater immediacy. And I think when you look at the Nationals, particularly at the top of the draft, and even this year, there's no real college pitching. They didn't take a college pitcher until round 7. And while you can hit in round 6 through 11, I'll say, on some college pitchers, and anything from 12 to 20, I think really if you get any sort of major league value out of a college pitcher at that point, it's great. Not a lot of like college starters that turn into major league starters are coming out of those rounds. Not that it's unheard of, but it's obviously less likely. Rounds 1 through 5 is really where you're finding those guys. And it doesn't have to be your first pick, as we saw, with the Red Sox a couple of years ago, landing Peyton Toley. But, over the course of a few years, I think you do need to go after some of those college starters. They're the guys that are getting to the big leagues a lot quicker. And especially the guys that are early in the draft, whether it's Chase Burns, whether it's Trey Savage. Paul Skeens obviously is one, but he's certainly an outlier. We talked about Peyton Toley. Nolan McLean is another one that wasn't a first rounder, right? But, was somebody that after more or less a year in the minors was really able to make that jump to the big leagues. And, honestly, if the Mets wanted to, they probably could have done that even earlier. And, when I look at the Nationals drafts, I see a lot of hitters in the early rounds. I don't see a lot of college pitchers with upside. And even the ones that they have, like they took Jackson Kent a couple years ago in 2024 in the 4th round. He had a pretty good year for them. He moved pretty fast for them. And obviously he had less expectations than others. I think when you're an organization like this, where you do have some hitting talent, you can find those guys in comp rounds. You can even take one still early in the 1st round, but you do need to probably commit at least 2 to 3 picks in the first 7 rounds on college pitchers. And, it will take a few years, but you have the potential to really hit some homers if you do that. Have some rotation pieces or rotation depth, as well as trade assets that you can move to reinforce whatever is needed in your team at a given point in time. But, they really haven't gone after college pitching over the last 5 years or so. The last draft where they really did that pretty consistently, I think, was the Cavalli draft. Though I guess they did take Jake Bennett in the 2nd round in 22 or 23.
22.
That was 22.
Yeah, but they took Jake Bennett in the 2nd round, but in a draft where they took Elijah Green in the 1st,
exactly,
Trey Lipscomb in the 3rd, Brenner Cox in the 4th, and Jared McKenzie in the 5th, and Nathaniel Leyva in the 6th.
Yep.
So, yes, they did but they took one pitcher in the top 200 picks that year also.
Yeah. And, you know, it was the same in 2021 where it was House, Lyle,
Ray Bossier. It was Dustin
Toolsy.
Signs.
Yeah, they took Dustin Sainz, who was like, you know, an undersized lefty who's lifted at 5'11", but is probably like 5'9". So it's just they're not taking sort of these horse guys that maybe have traits and attributes. You're like, all right, this, you know, Peyton Toy was at TCU, was a two-way guy, and you know, we know we can do this and get him on this program and probably add some velocity. They're not doing that sort of thing. I think it's probably pretty easy to say, hey, we have people in place that can identify those guys now. It's just a matter of getting, you know, the right people in the positions and personnel and player development to kind of execute that. So I do think, you know, that's one area where the Nationals could put some draft resources toward in the immediate, you know, next year or two, and probably see some pretty quick turnaround wins.
So number 3 is emphasizing developing better contact skills for the Nationals' young hitters. Focus primarily on the minor leagues here. Could be said to the big league level too, to some extent. But so the thing that is a little bit worth digging into here, we have at Baseball America, and I'll put it in the show notes for this, the StatCast hitting rankings for all 30 organizations. And one of the things that does stand out for the Nationals, and it is not a surprise that the Nationals rank best. Their best ranking is they are second of all 30 orgs in 90th percentile exit velocity. The Nationals do not have a problem with having players who hit the ball hard. That is what they have selected. That is what they've done. That is what they've developed. What they've had a real problem with is getting those players to hit enough, to make enough contact for that power to really play and for that power to matter. And the key thing that really does jump out about this, though, is this, it's not swing decisions. Often you would see with that, it would be like, okay, they're bottom of the barrel in swing decisions. Their chase rate's really high. And you would say, okay, so what we're going to have to do is really work on making better swing decisions, you know, understanding pitch recognition, getting better at that. They're 11th in swing decisions. That's fine. That's not a giant flaw. Their giant flaw is they're dead 30th in contact percentage and they're 29th in zone contact percentage, which I do think is actually a more challenging hurdle because you have these players who have real power, and make adequate swing decisions, but they can recognize a fastball or a breaking ball in the zone that's where they want it to go, you know, where they want to hit, and then they swing and miss. That's where it's like, okay, some of that's going to be, some of these players is going to be like, hey, I'm sorry, but we can't fix this. But you're trying to like, okay, I would say that you are looking at, as you bring in, as you try to help your hitting instructors develop these players, you're kind of looking at trying to reduce length in swings, trying to clean up things as far as setup. Like if you have a player who's particularly noisy and it's like, hey, this bat waggle means you're late, you know, like looking on timing, things like that. That's where I think that they've really got to make a point of emphasis. And this kind of goes to maybe also they have to steer a little bit towards, hey, we got to bring in some more players with bat to ball skills and then develop their power. We're going to put them on bat speed program. You want to have a little bit of a mix, I would say, Geoff, of all this, but like they've gone too far in the big power, big swings, beatable in the zone. And I would ask you before we move on to the next one, which is a little bit related, how easy do you think that is to fix? Is that something that you're going to have to kind of go to your next wave of prospects, or is that something that you think is fixable?
I think it's going to be on a case by case basis. And, you know, once again, I know we've kind of beating this drum to death. I sort of feel like it's going to come down to player development and who is in place in player development. If they have, you know, a history of this stuff, if they've had success, if it's the right message for this group. Some of that's probably going to be taking inventory of the type of things that were taught and focused on. Because I can't necessarily say that the Red Sox have had great success in terms of improving contact and swing decisions. They've tended to draft guys that already had a really good foundation of that and then try to build up bat speed is, sort of been what the focus is. So I do think that some of the targeting is probably really going to change going forward. That said, not everybody that's in this organization is probably fully lost. And quite often when we see improvements in player development, I think we saw it with the Cardinals and we saw it with someone like Josh Baez, where some processes and folks have changed, obviously, as Bloom was kind of put in charge of improving processes before, he took the top job there. And, you see somebody like Josh Baez make a pretty significant improvement year over year. And I'm sure there's guys like that. It's probably not necessarily Elijah Green based on how bad that contact is. But, if they could get him to a point where he's Spencer Jones, I think people would be pretty excited about that player just because of what his defensive ability is. So I think like the fact that there are EVs there, I think is maybe hinting at some low-hanging fruit that maybe not all these guys are going to turn to something, but if there's guys with impact that maybe we can improve how they approach their at-bats and their plan at the plate and kind of attack swing decisions like that and hopefully hack contact by improving swing decisions. Maybe we see better results for these 5 out of this group of 15 that had these good EVs, but kind of crappy everything else.
Number 4 on this kind of segues very nice with that. Like you said, you mentioned Elijah Green. So Elijah Green's Brady House. Even on the college side, it's guys like Trey Lipscomb, where it's like, okay, there's real power here, but there's length to the swing. There's questions about contact ability. I think that where the Nationals are right now, you do have to ask the question if you're coming in as the new regime and say, hey, do we need to kind of course correct here a little bit? Do we need to approach this a little differently? Because this is an organization that is, I would say, overweighted towards big power, big swings, swings and miss. And I am not telling you right now that if Elijah Green had been drafted by another organization, none of these problems would have arose. But I will say that was probably the worst combination I can think of player and organization, because the Nationals have not shown that improving contact ability has been a strength of theirs. That's been kind of a consistent issue for them, kind of year after year after year. And Elijah Green, who to this day, when you talk to evaluators, when you talk to scouts who scout Elijah Green, they will tell you really good defensively, can really run, real power, 10-hit tool. Like it's the combo where it's like none of this can play unless you can get to a baseline of contact. And Elijah Green's baseline of contact has been 40 to 44% of the time. He will step to the plate and he will walk back to the dugout on a strikeout. And no player, you just can't be a successful player if you say, I have to do all my damage in 55 to 60% of my plate appearances because the other ones I'm striking out. It doesn't work for anyone. But it's not just Elijah Green. Brady House fits into this in some ways. There's a number of players where they've kind of emphasized that approach. And I think that they would need to, at this point, I would say it's fair for the new front office to come in and say, is that an approach we want to continue right now? Or to kind of go to your college pitching, side, is it a little bit of a time to kind of emphasize more contact and athleticism and defensive skills to kind of leaven out some of this? But that leads into our last point. And this one is the one I think that is the most obvious, but it's also the one that has been one of the biggest problems for them in the 2020s, which is when we say, okay, so the Nationals were a great team in the late 20 teens. They won the World Series. And you say, okay, and part of that is, hey, if you draft Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg 1-1 overall, you won the lottery twice. And I don't mean because you picked them. I mean because they happen to have the number 1 picks in years where Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg were available. And let's be honest, the Bryce Harper year, like if they had gotten it, quote, wrong, it still was like, okay, do you want Manny Machado? Okay, that's fine. So they did that. They traded for Trey Turner. Great move. But on top of that, they traded for Adam Eaton, was a very useful player for them. But I would say that, like, on top of that, this is an organization that did spend money at that time. This is an organization, Patrick Corbin, that money didn't always work out but they spent big money for Patrick Corbin. They had Max Scherzer. They re-signed and extended Steven Strasburg. This was an organization that was spending big money at that point on Bryce Harper, but even before he left in free agency. They had all free agents like that they brought in, and additionally, like again, not Kurt Suzuki was a ton of money, but Kurt Suzuki, veterans like Howie Kendrick, they spent money. And here we are in the 2020s. If you said, what is the biggest, most significant free agent signing that the Nationals have made, let's just say since they traded Juan Soto, you really wouldn't have a whole lot of candidates to spell out there. Again, yes, they have. I'm not saying that they haven't signed any free agents. Yes, they did bring in Nathaniel Lowe. Okay, they've had guys like that there, briefly in some cases, but that was not a major signing. If you were going to okay, so let me ask you this way, Geoff. Would you spend the money right now? Okay, they also signed Josh Bell last year, who had a good, was fine for them. But would you spend the money now, or is this something where it's like, is the time to spend the money to bring in some guys to kind of go around this young core now, or is it better off to say, we're not that close? We're going to spend money, but we've first got to rebuild this a little bit to even know where to spend the money first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I do think that it depends on, what they decide to do at the major league level. Because we did talk about there are some pieces here. Whether it's, the combination of Wood, Cruz, Abrams, Garcia. I think Dalen Lyle proved to be at least a good platoon player, at worst. If not something maybe a little bit better. You still have Mackenzie Gore. You do have Josiah Gray, who's had moments in the big leagues coming back. Mitchell Parker, who not great once again, but probably fine as part of your rotation depth. I mean, if you wanted to go out into the marketplace and, shop for another outfielder on a reasonable deal, I think especially with the current market that we've had over the last couple of years, we're outside of the top tier free agents. A lot of guys are sitting on the market a little bit longer. A lot of guys are signing bridge deals for a year at a high number, right? To then kind of rebuild value, get back into the marketplace. I don't think that they're in such a bad position if that's the direction that they want to go.
Okay, so you talked about the maybe a veteran outfielder, and I do think that there's going to be available outfielders at a reasonable price. But so here's the kind of the core question to wrap this up with. Gore, Gray, Luis Garcia, you've got 2 more years right now before they're free agents, right? You've got the 26 season, you got 27. Then CJ Abrams, he's a free agent in 28. You can obviously try to extend some of these guys, but that's kind of, I would say, like part of this core. Do you think that this team, I would say it's a big leap to say that they couldn't go from sub 70 wins in 25, having not won 75 games any time this decade, to going to a playoff contender in 26. But is it realistic to say that they should be spending to try to make this team a contender before those guys hit free agency? Or is it more realistic to say your goal is 27 and 28, and maybe some of those guys have to move to try to build towards that 27-28 window?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes more sense to probably sell some of those guys. I do think that selling Wood in particular would be like a terrible idea, in my opinion.
You got to have some stars.
Yeah. And I think you probably, you would stick with Cruz and see where that goes over the next couple of years. I mean, I wouldn't be necessarily against potentially trying to hammer out an extension, with Mackenzie Gore. He's going to be 27 years old entering next year, kind of going into prime years. If you feel as if, there was some issues with player development at the major league level, he's potentially a guy that you could see on the upswing. On the other side, he's never thrown 170 innings over 4 years in the big leagues, and obviously has had some health concerns, leading up to that point as a minor league player. So, there's probably some question as to whether it's even a sound investment because you're signing him, probably for, his age 29 to, 33, 34 sort of years. You have to make a determination if you think he's going to make that jump. It's possible he does. I mean, that is when starters seem to kind of hit their peak. It's not necessarily at 25 or 26 or 27 like you kind of see with hitters. They kind of go into that window in the late 20s, and then I think those years in the early 30s, if they're good starters, typically are prime years as well. So age-wise, it's not necessarily an unsound investment, but I think you can look at some of the history with the player and say, is this ever going to be a guy that's going to give us 180 to 200 innings a year and be, an ace for us, which is probably how I would assume he's going to want to get paid.
So that's our look. That is our prescription for how to try to fix the Nationals. I would say, to wrap this up on the Nationals, that it's a project, but at the same time, we will definitely talk about organizations that have further to go, right? There are pieces there. Like I would say that probably you just hit on it. The big thing is if you can get James Wood, the starting point of any team having a great team is to have a star, an honest to goodness 5+ WAR every year star. And James Wood has a chance to be that. If you could say that James Wood can be a 5 WAR player, and between CJ Abrams and Dylan Cruz and Brady House, we didn't talk even about the other strength of this is there's some injuries to it. But between Harlan Susanna and Travis Sikora, who's obviously injured, and Alex Clemney, and bringing back Cade Cavalli, who came back last year, there are some pieces here on the arm side too that could contribute, could be a part of the next good Nationals team. There are pieces here, but there's also a lot of work to do.